And we're live.
We are live. Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Makers Podcast. My name is Fiona and I'm your host and the founder of the podcast. But we are super excited over here to my left to have the amazing Robert Skrobe, who is our a man of many hats, a man of many talents, I will say. You are the co-host of the Remotely Interesting podcast, the owner of the Dallas Design Sprints company, and you are also the founder of the Global Virtual Design Sprint movement, which is its fourth version, I understand, coming out in a few weeks, which we'll get a chance to talk about. So we are super excited, Robert, to have you here. I think I saw you speak at the Design Sprint conference back in Sydney, and you beamed in with a few of your collaborators in November. A lot would have changed since then when it comes to virtual sprints. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what your last few months have been like?
Well, there's just been this weird thing called a pandemic that's hit everything. It's kind of turned things upside down slightly.
Yeah.
That's probably the most profound thing that I think most people can relate with right now.
Yeah, that's it.
But since that time, since we entered this new era of staying indoors and talking in small confined spaces and having, seeing each other through a video screen, I've just been doing a lot of exploration in this space around how design sprints and remote facilitation work with people that may not know about it or are used to doing facilitation in person.
Yeah.
And how that translates for businesses and what makes sense for them to do versus what they currently have in-house and who knows about remote facilitation.
Yeah.
Been doing a lot of coaching, a lot of one-on-ones. February was just madness with everyone anticipating the entire global economy to start falling down the wayside, trying to make sense of how they could position themselves to basically survive the storm that was coming. And then after that kind of settled down a tad and people knew what they wanted, the GVDS was right around the corner, which is coming up in 2 weeks. So preparation for that is always many nights till like 2 or 3 in the morning, kind of like now. So I practice my insomnia at least twice a year, and this is that period.
Good on you. Because it's 11 o'clock over there in Dallas, isn't it? You're beaming to us from Dallas. Yep. And we are live to the audience as well. So I want to say hey to everyone who is out there and is listening live here from all over the world. We've got some of your super fans on here. I think we've got people from the UK and the US and down here in Australia. So we're going to have a bit of a chat, Robert and I, for the next kind of 45 minutes. And then we're going to open it up to some questions. So if you've got any questions, you can pop them in the Q&A and we will see those come up in the chat function, and we'll be able to ask Robert some of those questions towards the end of this recording. But can we go back a step, Robert, and can you tell us, before we dive into your experiences, the do's and don'ts of, here we go, go into space.
Just in case something will happen in the background, I want to make sure that we're completely not distracted by it. That's okay.
I think that's all right. Is it your little one, Owen? He might show up. Is that we might get a guest?
Yeah, there might be other people that come into the room, so I just want to make sure that no one, the background doesn't distract. So that's all.
Cool.
Go for it.
Can we take a step back and tell us a little bit about how you ended up doing so many virtual design sprints or becoming a bit of a leader in the space? Tell us about your career.
So early on, when I started practicing design sprints, right around the time that the Blue Book came out, the Sprint book by Jake Knapp, we were testing it out in Sabre, which was my employer back then. And we were trying it out with the design teams to figure out what worked and what didn't work. After we did the first big company-wide demo of the process, I think it was like in August, September, it was right around then where I started getting, we were having a conversation about, and we thought, this is going to go virtual. This is going to go remote. I mean, it's only a matter of time before it eventually gets there. It was instinctual more than it was kind of looking at the lay of the land. Just because so many different things were kind of heading that space, it just made sense that a lot of the trappings of doing in-person facilitation getting everybody together, putting them in the same room, dedicating their time and clearing their calendar for 3, 4, 5 days at a time.
Mm.
If you were to translate that into an online environment, there were bigger advantages of time and cost savings, not only by compartmentalizing both the in-person decision time and the offline kind of iteration and ideation time. That just made sense. The problem was is that there wasn't a roadmap for that. And most people I know in the facilitation space like kind of poo-pooed it. They were like, yeah, no, humans want to kind of relate to one another. They want to meet in person. It'll never happen. The usual kind of pushback from it. But usually when you get that kind of pushback, that's pretty good indication that you got something. Either you're crazy or you may be onto an idea. So I think in November 2018, I did a pilot with some people that were in the space and saying, let's just try this out. Let's do one sprint in November, see what happens. It ended up being 3 teams, and we brought in an outfit from Austin that was a disaster relief organization, and IBM and a bunch of other people that kind of came to the table, and I was like, whoa, no one was like, it just started consuming my time. And with the outputs that we came from that and the feeling that we had from it, we knew something was there. People wanted to continue working on their sprints even a month after we got together.
Yeah.
So keeping it in the free version, we went for version 2, and that was in April of 2019. And that was madness. That was about 300 plus people. Well, this is all for free. So 300 plus people that eventually signed up, 150 stuck around. We had 17 teams that lasted a full month. So it was like the crazy notion that we could do not just 1, 2, but 4 weeks full of sprints. It was something that started the conversation about, we've proven unequivocally that you can do this remote. It wasn't even a conversation anymore. It had happened, it was done. Now it was optimizing and figuring out what made sense to do. November was more experimentation with different types of sprints, different processes, opening up some experimentation around time spent on the sprint. And then this pandemic that we have with COVID-19 has kind of pushed everybody into a remote environment. So suddenly the small swimming pool, the kiddie pool that we were playing in, had 500 people trying to get in at the same time. So for this one, we're not necessarily trying to fit a swimming pool into a Tupperware container. What we're going to do is our own custom build of a virtual design sprint that makes sense for optimizing time and offline and online time. We're also putting a heavy emphasis on education. So we're providing free virtual design sprint training as part of the engagement. So a couple of weeks before you do your sprint, pretty much I've taken the attitude like it's trying to teach my mother how to do design sprints. And my mother is someone that can't figure out a Wi-Fi password, bless her heart. But her and technology are like distant cousins, like on opposite sides of the earth.
I love it. That's a design principle. That's like, can my mum use it? That's it.
Yeah. So that's why I'm kind of using that philosophy to kind of put that into place. And finally, we learned a lesson in November about just doing sprints and not having an after, like the next chapter. So every challenge that we have for people to choose from on the teams has a sponsor that knows where it's going to go if it's very successful. They have the right network connections. They'll reach out to people in their network on where to go, whether it's VC funding or if it's like a greater organization that's nonprofit. Since our event is COVID-19 oriented, about half of our challenges are dealing with social issues around the pandemic, like loneliness and domestic violence. And then there's another bucket that's like really innovative thinking around women's sexual health, or the future of Columbia in terms of like digitally kind of bringing it up to speed. It just runs the gamut, but they're all from the participants. So the idea is that if you put in a challenge, you have to have a plan on how it's going to work after it's done. Like, where are you going to take it? Who are you going to talk to and make it happen? So that's what's on tap in a couple weeks. And when May starts, it's going to be 3 full weeks of that. And then June is going to be a showcase where the teams that made it all the way through and had something to show, we'll get them on Zoom webinar like this, and they will present what they've done, their work, and we'll invite industry experts and people in the field that know this stuff to come in and take a look at the work.
Amazing. So it's going to be your most ambitious one yet, it sounds like. I want to dive into more about the Global Virtual Design Sprint in a minute and get into the actual mechanics of how this is going to work, so people can understand, even if they want to get involved as well, what that might involve and what the commitment is. Can we take a step back I'm thinking about some of the audience here who potentially are, probably not new to design sprints, but possibly new to the concept of virtual design sprints. And one of the biggest debates out there that I no doubt you've been a big part of, I've seen a lot of your blogs about this as well, that kind of concept of the online versus the virtual. So we're in a situation now where we've all gone virtual because that is the new environment and the new way that we have to work. So there isn't really a choice. But talk to us a little bit about what you see as the major differences between them, and even the benefits of, regardless of COVID-19, of actually doing sprints in a virtual environment. Could you talk us through some of those?
Sure. So some of the benefits in the physical design sprint world are that you get to work with people one-on-one, and you get a wealth of information, like non-verbal communication, regular communication. You really get to bond with people as human beings. You get to form meaningful relationships in the old kind of way of doing things. Things are much more tangible. You have ample time for discussion. You can elaborate on your point of view and really be understood. And basically you have dedicated time where people can kind of get together and talk about things. So the physical aspect of it, of kind of having a workshop, has always been about the experience and the outputs from that and where they go. What are they something that are executable? Do they build upon an existing body of work? Are they going to improve an existing project or start a new one? So those usually all kind of weigh in on traditionally what has been in person.
Yeah.
The virtual space is different in that, and I'm going to make a distinction between remote and virtual.
Yeah.
Remote is distributed teams where you may have like a group of people in one room, and then you have a couple people dialing in from Ireland or from Chechnya or from Australia, and going back to the States, and really your time zone managing, but people kind of dial into a central room that's doing all the activity. Virtual is everyone has their own screen. So it doesn't matter where they are or who they are. When you come into a sprint, you have your own connection to the web, and you have your own screen. Even if there's somebody with you that's sitting right next to you, you're working off the same screen, so it levels the playing field completely. Another characteristic of doing it this way, the virtual design sprints, is that you don't spend a lot of dedicated time, and I may mention this, all at the same time on one day. You essentially get together for decision making, for elaborating on points of view to be understood. And the discussion parts tend to be both online and offline. So you use things like Slack, Basecamp, Notion, and document everything that you're doing, or put your point of view in there so people can passively consume what you are trying to say or communicate without dedicating their personal time to getting it done. Another advantage of doing it online is you can record everything. And that includes your subject matter expert interviews, the actual sessions that you do with all your teams, so that stakeholders can pop in and view what's going on, and they can view recordings as well. You can timestamp those within Zoom and other applications, so you can hit critical points of conversation that people should know about.
Yeah.
And if you decide to do user interviews, you can record all of those, and people can watch them on their own time and react to them and put their results in something like Miro or Teams or something else to track what's going on. It's very flexible in terms of some person that may have a really aggressive schedule around getting something else done but still wants to participate. It also lends itself to being able to dial in from anywhere and basically be a part of what's going on. The cons of doing it virtually is that you have to do a lot more in terms of preparation, and you have to over communicate in your expectations and what people need to do between different days. An example of that is when you go from Monday to Tuesday. Traditionally it's lightning demos. You have to make sure that people understand how to put those in your whiteboard application. What they need to put in there in terms of detail. So those are kind of the high level things, but I've always kind of gravitated to virtual because I've been able to see how you can still have that camaraderie that you experience in physical design sprints manifest in virtual, but it is a completely different animal.
I think such interesting insights there. Something I want to even go a little bit deeper into, and you've touched on it a little bit, is that the connection between people. This is a big topic that everyone is talking about at the moment. There is this massive rush just to take everything online without necessarily thinking about that overall experience. Can you talk a little bit to, what you do in terms of, from a facilitator perspective, to manage energy, for one thing, your own energy and others in the room? What are some of those sorts of techniques that you use, and how do you up the connection between the group as well?
So I'll talk to it in two phases. One is the social aspect, and the other is the kind of energy, making sure the energy kind of stays where it is throughout the entire thing.
Mm.
So from a social aspect, hopefully you've had a chance to meet in person before you actually get together for a virtual sprint. If not, it's not a deal breaker. Okay. But chances are you want to take the time before the sprint actually happens to do some sort of kickoff session, something where it's 90 minutes. You kind of go through, everyone's thinking around who's the audience for what you're doing, what's the current experience they have, and where you want them to go, so that you're kind of doing a little bit of problem framing. Maybe if you have a very ambitious group, you can do prototyping, which is Alberto Savoya's approach to testing the market for desirability before you even do a design sprint to see if it's worth it in the first place.
Cool.
But most of the social aspect of virtual sprints happens previous to the actual sprint happening. Mm-hmm. In this day and age with COVID-19, most of that is online, but it is kind of extended discussion and conversation that people listen into. And people do that with camera and off camera, but it's perfectly up to them if they want to engage. Then with the actual design sprint itself, the socialization, there's less discussion, but there's more on the side of execution, and a lot of the discussion is captured in through offline channels. So that's and then after the sprint is also where it ramps up on social again. And I found that with the GVDS, people find a way to kind of gravitate and meet one another eventually. If they meet online, but there's this implicit promise that eventually you're going to meet with them down the road at some point, which has happened. And those are whole different stories I won't get into, the but with the energy that you're talking about within a virtual design sprint, it depends a lot on the facilitator and what they value. Sometimes the facilitator's tone and the way they approach the entire engagement will manifest itself in the activities and how people kind of approach all the exchanges of information and what's going on. Other times it's going to be how active you are as a facilitator to make sure that people are paying attention. Yep. So I've heard concerns from people that do in-person facilitation that they don't know what the other person is doing, and they kind of want cameras on always. When realistically, you don't need to do that. People have their reasons for not coming online or not showing their face, and you have to respect that for one reason or another. They may be dealing with something at home where they don't want something in the background kind of interfering. They may have something where they're sick and they just don't want to show their face, but whatever the situation is, you kind of have to respect it. But usually the good measure is like for every 15 minutes, you take 10 minutes of you take a break of some type, or you do a check-in with everyone to see what the pulse is of everyone, like how's everyone feeling. Sometimes you can put that into a mural and have people kind of put emojis down or describe what they're feeling anonymously. But usually it's for every hour, there's like 10 minutes of a break. Sometimes you at the half-hour point, you can do a quick kind of how's everyone doing. And if anyone has any problems, you can use the chat that's in the native to say like Zoom or GoToMeeting or WebEx, and have them privately send you something that may be going on in the background. So, like I have somebody coming over to do some work in the house, and I may step away from the computer at the top of the hour. Just as a facilitator, you'll be able to see and hear all of that.
Beautiful. You did shout out to your podcast, Remotely Interesting. For everyone listening, definitely get on that. It's the best that's out there at the moment. But you and Sandy did a cool episode a little while ago with some icebreakers as well. So you had a few people jump in and share some of the icebreakers that they use. Do you bring some of those into your sessions typically? You sort of just like a normal facilitator sense when maybe that's required?
We usually teach those as part of what we do here in the GVDS. For me, usually the icebreakers I fall back on, I'm a creature of habit, like I think most people are. So I'll ask people, I'll have their LinkedIn profile clickable for people when they first come on, if they never met each other, to kind of check those out. But I'll ask either their favorite food or their favorite vacation spot, like where are they going after COVID's done.
Yeah.
And you can use, like in Mural, you can use their image search and people just drag and drop images, but explain why it's meaningful for them. Some of the other things that we did for that remotely interesting episode were really interesting. That was the beauty of it, is that we had a community to tap into that had a lot of perspective on how to get those things to kind of bring something interesting to the table. A lot of it was sketching, of which I'm really bad at, which is fine. I don't think anybody else on the call was. And Andy Davis, for one, had some really interesting ones that he's used. And what was really enlightening was that everyone had a different approach. And part of it was personality, but part of it was applied application through experience. And that's why I partner with Sandy Land too, is because she has these kind of, I'll think of tons of ideas, but she'll usually be like, well, why don't we try this? This makes sense. And she'll kind of narrow it down to something that's practical. So when we did the Icebreaker episode, we were like, yeah, we kind of think we've seen all the best practices and the recommendations. Well, we got to bring people in and give them give us their kind of go-to ones when they're first starting out. And it was interesting to see how that first half was all sketching. The second half was more kind of play than it was anything else.
No, it was a great one. That's a good combo. Speaking of your best of or your go-tos, can you talk to us just a little bit about your go-to tools? I know that you're famously a Mural guy over Miro. That's still correct?
Yeah, and I wrote an article about the differences between the two, because each has advantages and disadvantages. I think it was Miro and Miro, A Tale of Two Whiteboards.
Yeah.
In essence, both organizations and companies are working on the things that are kind of, they know are their Achilles heels. For Mural, it's their rendering engine. For Miro, it's their community and probably their interface. We surmise that if once Mural had kind of got the rendering engine under control and there was no lag at all, that was going to be a big plus. Same with kind of their extensibility. With Miro, they're just starting with their community. They're trying to do a big push for that. And the same with their interface. They're making minor changes, but they're constantly improving on it. The major advantage that either one of them has is that Mural has a bit of, it's been long established a community hold on things. So they resonate with how their users kind of use the tool and how it's being implemented. So there's a bit of a favorite with Mural, but that's why I've stuck with them. So Mural, still stick with Zoom even with the security concerns. I've been playing with some odds and ends like Blue Jeans and other things like that, but the technology works. And outside of somebody kind of finding a passwordless meeting to let us know how much they like Trump or how much they like the Democrats, I haven't run into that myself. So
yeah, fair call. Okay, so it's Mural, it's still Zoom for you. Communicating offline for some of the groups you encourage, probably Slack or?
Yeah, Slack is something I fall back on, though Basecamp is with their Basecamp personal, that came really close. So, and I know a lot of people like Notion, and I try not to be too prescriptive around what tool to use. I try to give people options in terms of what I think would work. But sometimes people come to the table in facilitation and say, we're a Microsoft organization and we use Teams and we use WebEx because that's what our enterprise security team has said that we are cleared for. That's what you have to use. Yeah,
you just go with it. So staying on that point actually about what different organizations use. So with Dallas Design Sprints, you're running a lot of virtual sprints. You're working with companies, small to medium businesses. Can you tell us a bit about the work that you're doing there? That's part of the question. And the other part is, for some people who are listening in, they may be in organizations where they're trying to help or they're trying to get buy-in to do this sort of work, and it's still in some cases a bit of an uphill battle. So do you have a few examples you can talk to about how people can influence for people to do more virtual design sprints?
Sure. So most of my work in Dallas Design Sprints deals with consulting, and sometimes it's finding the right person for the job if it's not me. I set up a referral network last year because I had a lot of inquiries that where they, to your point, they weren't quite sure what design sprints were, but they just heard that you can go faster, do design work faster, get things done faster, and get everybody on the same page of what they need to do. So it was translating what they needed versus who I knew could actually do what they were asking for. Sometimes it was design centric. They just needed somebody to kind of have them go through the motions. Or it was, they had an engagement where their facilitator fell through and they needed somebody within 2 or 3 days that knew fintech and that was out of Argentina that could basically help them with their situation. So it was kind of finding those connections for people, and if there was a match in terms of like need versus what people could do, then that usually worked out pretty well. For the question around telling people that they have to, how they would sell virtual sprints to the organization. So I've been putting a lot of slight deviation. A lot of the things that I get a lot of questions for, I put into articles because I find that it's better to put that in the written form than kind of reiterate in different ways. So there's an article called How to Sell Design Sprints, and it's on Medium as well as LinkedIn. But essentially that whole deal with kind of convincing your organization that virtual sprints or design sprints are the way to go is not to talk about design sprints. It's not about the process. People always go solutions first when it comes to kind of selling the benefits of something, and that's not it. You have to figure out what problem you're trying to solve for, or what the pain is of the person that you're talking to and what they're trying to alleviate. You may not even need a process. It may be something that's completely out of the bounds of working on a project or a product. What you really want to do is make a human connection, figure out what they're all about, what's really bothering them, and see how you can help them first and foremost. And if you feel that the process could work for them, maybe it's a lightning decision jam rather than a full design sprint, or a conversation with a couple of other people that are in service design, or that are in that do professional journey mapping, or maybe even someone that's in a completely different realm of process that could help based on like jobs to be done. I think it's important to understand what the underlying problem is and the symptoms are, and starting there, and don't really try to think that the design sprint widget is going to fix everything. That's where people kind of make a mistake.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. It's just taking a basic design-led approach to even just identifying where those challenges are, instead of just trying to look at this as a solution. What about what about when you work with, we have this scenario sometimes where there are people in the organization that know that this is the right solution for the challenge that they've got, as in this is the right process that's going to solve it. But there are others in the organization that can't get their head around what this is. So demoing these sorts of things, talking about it, sharing stories. Do you come across that quite a bit?
Yeah, it depends on who has the resistance.
Yeah.
So in every organization, there's going to be someone or a group or someone else that will either seek understanding or have a particular disposition towards a process that they like what's being done, and they see new processes as a way of either making things messy or not necessarily it's going in the wrong direction. I've learned over time not to convince people otherwise. It's really got to be where they have to either experience it or see it for their own purposes. The more convincing I've been trying to do with some people in the past, the more they dig their heels in. You really just have to show that it can be done. And when they don't hear it from you, but they hear it from other people that they either trust or they have a relationship with, or they have some, they hold in some sort of regard, that's where the conversation starts to open up a bit. You're not necessarily converting them. They want to clarify something that they may have held as a assumption, and they're now, because they have new information, they want to go back and re-verify, or they want to clarify what they've heard. So that's typically what happens. And with integrating any kind of design sprint process in an organization, you have to start super small, go for small things, just small different activities that come from the design sprint process, but you can apply to different things that you do at work, whether it's to-do lists or team orientation, and just show how this process works. Then you don't have to profess what it is. They just experience it and they go, well, what is this? And then you go, okay, well, let me explain how this kind of works in terms of like an overall thing.
Mm.
Because the more that there's trust built around you, who represents the process, the more they're willing to kind of do a little bit more just to see if they have the same benefits by trying it out. So it's kind of like a touch and go process, but that's usually how it organically works.
Yeah, cool. Can we actually talk a bit about the virtual experience? So Global Virtual Design Sprints coming up on the 4th of May is the kickoff.
Yep.
Last one you had around 300 to 350 people, you mentioned before. Can you tell us a bit, give or take, give us a little bit more detail about what to expect, or even the evolution of this, where it's come from, and more about what people can expect this time if they're keen to get involved as well?
So the transition from last year, April to November, was free to paid. And we had to because, it becomes an expensive habit more so than an actual like platform that I can build anything off of. But it's primarily just to show that it had business possibilities. It's something that I could work off of and sustain myself with, but also to start getting past the notion that I had to do everything for free. So that was a bit of a blocker personally for me. So I didn't feel comfortable charging for it because I had been used to it. It was presented as being free. And I knew I was going to lose some folks because of it, because they felt the pureness of it was going to go away. But that's fine.
Mm.
What I did learn is that when you do start charging for something, the expectations change exponentially. It's no longer just about a benefit of the doubt. People are exchanging money for value and implied value. So you have to provide that. And if you don't, you can apologize, but they'll be okay with it, but you have to learn from it. So the biggest difference between last November and this one is that we're really taking some of the major feedback to heart, like having challenges that go past the sprint, making sure that the training is integrated into the templates, not having one mode of communication that everyone can kind of function. Being very clear on what the team's role are, how much time is being spent on the virtual sprint, what you need to dedicate up front for that, and managing expectations around that regard, so that it's not just signing up and sitting back like a movie and kind of taking it all in. It's really understanding what your role is and the reason why you do the work and what the tangible benefits are afterwards.
Mm. And what sort of commitment is that for individuals? So you mentioned it runs over the month. Are people in their teams working off and on throughout that month? How many sprints are they doing on each challenge? Is it up to them? Talk us through an example of what a team might actually do if someone was in it.
So for the month so it's 3 weeks. So it's May 4th to the 22nd, but the sprint isn't 3 weeks long.
No.
It's 3 individual weeks where people can choose their engagement from week to week.
Yeah.
So the first week may be observation. They may just observe a couple of teams but not get engaged. The second one, they decide because of the research background, they're going to do user research for this team and this challenge. Then the third week can be something completely different. They may take it off or they may observe again. But once they're in, they can pick and choose which particular team they want, and the team chooses what challenge they adopt. So right now we have about 31 challenges that are up for review by the participants. They put their names next to ones that they're really interested in. And based on the number of responses we get, we kind of rank them by order. So we have a top 10 that we kind of lead with, that we showcase to participants to adopt as teams. And a couple weeks before the event happens, usually there's a team formed, they know the challenge, we've scheduled the kickoff, they start exploring the space, they talk about the end in mind, and we recommend a course of action for all of them to kind of go down. That's pretty much the structure of it. So it isn't where we're asking people to do 3 weeks of straight design sprints. It's more, we'll assign you to teams based on your preferences, but then your engagement model will be worked out with the team and what makes sense for you and your schedule, because we ask for their availability those weeks. Some people only have like 6 hours, depending on what their situation is. Some have anywhere from 30 plus, where they're unemployed, they have plenty of time, they're furloughed, whatever the situation is. They want to dedicate as much time as possible, not necessarily do the challenge, but for the artifacts it produces, things for their portfolio, the chance to have a greater conversation about their work and how they do their work, which is the point. to kind of elevate the professional, the practitioner to be the best versions of themselves.
Mm. The connection part of it is, I think, definitely not something that would be underestimated, especially at the moment. Something quite cool that's come from previous ones, I wasn't sure if I read it was either the second or the third, is the talent network. Was that true? That was one of the challenges, and it's actually come out that you've created this talent network where people can connect with each other. Did that come out of one of these global sprints?
Yeah, so there was a kind of three-way conversation originally with Sabrina Gorich and Jerome Fermau.
Mm.
Jerome Fermau is from Talents for You in the Netherlands, and Sabrina Gorich is with Design Sprint Studio out of Stuttgart, Germany. The conversation started with them around how we can use the Design Sprint to find talent, or how we can find it for human resource organizations and departments to better match talent with purpose-driven employment, and find a way to have them emulate what they kind of work they do for a charity, and have that company kind of observe what happens. So they get an idea of a person's soft skills as well as their applied skills. And then the conversation that happens with the company is that, are they a good cultural fit? Do they seem to make sense for us? That was the original idea. And what Sabrina and Jerome did is they put it through the paces with 3 pilots in October before the sprint happened. And they did 2 talent sprints within the GVDS to further the idea of how that would manifest itself, and how and invited some organizations to have a conversation about what they saw, what was valuable, what wasn't. So they're probably further ahead than I am around that concept. But yeah, the talent sprint was their idea that they pushed, and I think they're going to be doing it again this time around for potentially the Kampala challenge, which is for Kampala, Uganda. There's a group of refugees down there that are learning computer programming to basically work with businesses on getting that done. So they want to somehow mix the talent sprint with that effort to find nascent talent within Africa, within Uganda, Africa, to see how that would manifest itself. So pretty ambitious, pretty interesting, but that's the GVDS, is that you have those manifestations of kind of people that have really interesting ideas, and you mix the processes together to see what happens.
What are some other examples of that? Because that is a really cool one. I can imagine that this happens every single year, where people come together and they're a team to solve a single challenge at a time, and then it takes on a life of its own. It becomes something else, whether it's sort of collaborations or connections or people ending up building companies together. Are there any stories of those sorts of connections that have come from GDVS?
I think the ideas themselves, since we didn't have the epilogue of the challenges in place after November, there were some 3 or 4 teams that still wanted to take what they had done and continue with it, but it just didn't work. However, there were people that formed relationships, meaningful ones, through their interactions on the team, and those resulted in some collaborations on particular, like, small little ideas. I don't have ones at the top of my head, but I'm thinking back on my LinkedIn around all the different things that came up with Natasha Wainwright, Nora Scully. There's something recently with Sandy Lamb and Tom Jepson and Jerome Fermau about doing a purpose-driven kind of experimentation with what they're doing. So I see it kind of manifesting itself through those previous kind of relationships that were formed. So there hasn't been, from the challenge side of things, no, there isn't really much to look at beyond the pilot one that turned into an actual award that was awarded a year later, because IBM, it's part of IBM, had adopted it in their blockchain technology, and it's a long story, but there was that particular dimension where it was like, wow, so it took a year, but a pilot engagement on a challenge actually morphed into something meaningful in a different way. Yeah,
nice. It feels like this is a moment in time where you could see some pretty spectacular collaborations or challenges. I think it feels like the appetite for solving these large social challenges is only growing at the moment, and also people's willingness to maybe take more of a global approach to do some of that stuff as well. What do you have some thoughts on what next? Obviously, it's been a pretty wild ride for you guys in the last few months, where, as I said, you kind of predicted that virtual design sprints were the thing back in November, and then it's happened and it's here and they're here to stay. What do you think is next? What should people be looking at?
I mean, I don't mean to be a negative Nelly, but we're staring in the face of like a global recession. I mean, and a big one. The amount, and just here in the States, the amount of unemployment is just, they're trying to massage it, but it's bad. And there's been a real need by the governments and other people to make claims that we're going to open in May and we're going to do this. And the reality is that until a scientist actually says it, it doesn't really happen anyway. When they can start saying we can go out and socialize and hug, then it'll make sense. So the people that do in-person facilitation are in a pickle, because their bread and butter has always been engaging physically, flying out to places and doing workshops. And that was what sustained their business. And the service part that I'm in, the services industry is it's wiped out for the most part, with the exception of like essential services in some places. And for particular disciplines like healthcare and other places, they're doing all right because they're still something that matters right now, with kind of getting people masks, getting people medical equipment and all of that. I think that there's going to be a de-emphasis on process, and this is just me. So take this with a huge grain of salt. In fact, throw a big giant grain of salt, put it in the background. It's just salt.
We're listening. There's
going to be a de-emphasis on process, and I think it's going to be more about what the quick win is. Not going to be less of a phrase, and it's going to be really a manifesto. And you're going to see things that are quick kind of tests of whether or not something works, and that already is existing in online with a lot of different stuff. Sometimes it's really couched in social media with Instagram and with TikTok and things that catch fire, but just because they're trending. But I'm talking about with products, like with prototyping and literally setting up small, short experiments where you learn from your environment, you learn directly from the market. You do you do these things where they're kind of fake, but they elicit some sort of market response that would justify, through data and through experiences, going in a particular direction, because the market wants that. Some people intuitive that very well, so you don't need this process to make it happen. But if you want to kind of get in the space of learning how to do prototyping and learning how to do these small experiments and seeing what seems to work, and learning constantly. This can be done no matter what your discipline: marketing, strategy, sales, design, research, customer support, development. It can be all over the place. The process just needs to be taught in a way that can be adopted, so that, like with design sprints and learning it, it can be piecemeal. It doesn't need to be a full-on prototyping experience. You can really pick and choose your battles. But I think that's what's next. And everyone's still waiting around for voice, and it's close, but that will definitely impact how people are currently doing design. But in terms of like what's next, something that's very akin to Alberto Savoya's prototyping, that probably is where I put my money.
Beautiful. And for people who are on the call and are not familiar with that as well, if you just Google Alberto Savoya's prototyping, there's a great talk. I think it's his Stanford one. It's from years and years ago now, but it's still kind of the most succinct way to explain it, as either a precursor or an alternative to going further down the line with prototypes. But it's a great concept, and there's a couple of guys, I think, here in Australia that do it as well.
It's you get in that practice, then you understand what the time saver it is, but also when you hit upon something, then the conversation can start about a design sprint real easy. It's like, okay, now we know there's something there. Let's kind of blow it out and get more people talking about it and continue to experiment and see what works. Yeah.
Super cool. I'm just going to give another shout out to anyone who's on the line and has any questions. You can pop those in. We've got a couple in here, but I'm just going to go with one more just around, who do you think people should be watching in this space? Speaking of people that are doing good things, you've mentioned a few there. There's obviously, we've talked about yours and Sandy's podcast. Who else is doing things in the virtual sprinting place that we should keep an eye on that's to learn from?
Maybe not necessarily in my space, but people that that are swimming in my circles that I see kind of making moves that would that are moving in the right direction. Like they're kind of doing the right habits and the right things together. Lisa Weinsberger is one of them. Her last name is Weins. She's going to kill me. Berger, I think. Somebody who's very purpose driven, has an incredible background in terms of just starting up stuff and kind of pushing things forward. That's somebody I'd look to. With Rakesh Kasturi, his last, I think it's Kasturi. He's somebody that's been playing around with the life sprint, and we're doing a promotion with him on that. But he's somebody that came into the second GBDS and pretty much rescued 2 or 3 teams because he was very good at taking chaos and making it, normalizing it. I think he's trying to build a foundation with Matt Stewart and some other folks on his team to provide some products that are design sprint like, but he's got the right instincts, I think, in that regard. There's the usual suspects of people I work with. I'm really rooting for Ross Chapman at Edge Sprints. I think there's something there that he does that I think he's very meaningful. Yeah, I'd say that's probably the top ones. I mean, I already mentioned Jerome and some other people, but I mean, if I think of other people that are really, really good in the space, not necessarily creating content or professing what they know. Andy Davis is a solid. He's in Fort Worth, Texas. He's with a company called Inspiris, and he's I call him the intrepid weather reporter because he has these backgrounds on like I do all the time. I wish I had the list when you asked me this question because I know there's somebody in Australia I'm forgetting.
No, that's all right. We can we'll tag a few people as well in this, so we'll put that in afterwards. Which is awesome.
Oh God, what is his name? Oh, geez, I see his face. He's look up the company More Space for Light.
Oh, cool, Dan Levy.
There you go.
Yeah, good one. Yeah.
The smiling chap, because every yeah,
he's a very good guy.
My kid's in the other room destroying things. Seriously, Dad.
That's where we all are now. So we've got a question on here. Okay, so what's the biggest blow up you've ever had in a sprint? What was your biggest mistake? I'm reading that as that we should avoid. Any real stuff ups that you want to? What did you learn?
Thinking that everything's good when it isn't. So you may have facilitated and organized something to nth degree, it hit all the buttons instinctually, and you decide to kind of put your hands off the steering wheel and think that everything's going to work. And I say that because sometimes with the GBDS, you want to hope that the facilitators with all the training in the world will know which direction to go in if things go in a particular direction with someone being very opinionated or wants to go a certain direction. So there's that. The kind of assuming that everything's okay. The other thing that's a learned experience that can throw people off is like when the unexpected happens. And that the example that comes to mind is the physical sprint. And it was something where I knew that I couldn't do it in an organization anymore, and I had to go to like a consultant role or a provider, where someone came in and decided I didn't like anything. They didn't like anything about the design sprint, so they decided to just use everything they learned at IBM and have the rest of the 4-day session be nothing but writing personas. Like all we did was write personas the entire time for the 20 or 30 people in the room. And
oh my God.
Me and my friend Adrian were just going, what just happened? And we had to somehow like kind of salvage it for whatever we were doing and said, sure, we're going to produce these high profile personas that will sit on the wall that no one else will use, but that's okay.
So God. So similar to what we get in normal facilitation, then it sounds like that is the kind of
it's got flavors of that
down and pits. Yeah, exactly. Good one. This one's probably a slightly more tactical one. How are you dealing with the technical setup of participants? So the onboarding, you mentioned before you like everyone to meet each other, but this is about how you deal with the technical setup of participants. So how are you onboarding them into Mural? And I guess en masse, if you've got 350, how does that work? Are you doing little tutorials or?
So size matters in the sense that if you're dealing with 350 people all at the same time and you're trying to teach them before a session, you're going to have to deal with things like breakout rooms.
Mm.
Also, you'll have to use something like Loom Pro or a desktop recorder to kind of do what you can to mitigate the questions in advance. So you have that as like kind of like a library, maybe 4 or 5 videos on what to do to get Zoom up and running, to test your microphone, to situate yourself in front of lights or the outside, and when what you should have next to you, how to use the Miro whiteboard, and chances are there's going to be half of your audience that'll never look at those and come in fresh straight from a meeting and just now they're sitting and trying to take it all in.
Yeah.
You just deal with that when it happens.
Mm.
Outside of those experiences of large organizations, the kickoff is a perfect time to test out your icebreakers, because you want to make that initial engagement, not everyone reads the brief, gives their opinion on what is there. That's not what it's about. It's, okay, let's get to know one another and let's have some fun in this whiteboarding space. And through play, they can understand how to use the tool and they can ask questions and they'll go about their own paces. Like, how do I increase my text? Or how I instead of, I have a circle digital card, but I want to make it a square. How do I do that? And if you know the tool very well, you can just say right then and there, all you have to do, and you're sharing a screen is go, boop, 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 and that's how you do it. And the time goes pretty fast, but what you're aiming for is not necessarily comprehension, but more confidence and understanding, knowing that if they encounter this during the session, you're going to be the exact same way. You're going to go, oh, just do this, this, and that. Or if you got a question, chat me up and give me about 5 minutes to get back to you because I'll be in the middle of something. But they'll know that you have their back when they ask you something regarding the technical aspects of things.
Yeah. Nice. So set it up early and get them to get in there and experience it. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for spending this evening or this afternoon for our guys here with us, Robert. That was so valuable, super cool. So GVDS, Global Virtual Design Sprint, happening on the 4th of May. Still time to sign up. We'll pop some links in there of how people can jump on that and get in touch. And yeah, hopefully you have a few more people from down under joining this time as well.
Sure. And one thing I always offer is that if you have any questions for me after this is done, I mean, be sure to populate whatever thread that you're going to be putting up on LinkedIn or whatever to make sure that, and I'll answer those as they come.
Beautiful.
But one thing I always recommend people doing is they send me an invite in LinkedIn where I'm pretty active. Just make sure there's a note attached and tell me the context of what you're dealing with or the situation in that 150 character limit as a starter. And we can just have a conversation about what you're dealing with, or if you have any follow-up questions to what we're talking about today.
That'd be amazing. Thank you so much, Robert. It's been incredible to talk to you. We really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll look forward to the global session and talk really soon.
Definitely will. And remember, everybody, wash your hands and be kind to one another.
Keep safe.
We're all dealing with something different.
Yeah, that's beautiful. All right, chat soon. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks for having me on. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.